Okay. Gosh. Right. Okay, take two. Right, I welcome members to the third meeting in 2003 of the Subordinate-Legislation Committee. As always, ask members to turn off mobile phones. We have apologies from Stuart Stevenson, MSP. Agenda item 1 is instruments subject to affirmative procedure. No points have been raised by our legal advisors on the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974, Exclusions and Exceptions, Scotland Order 2013 draft. Is the committee content with that instrument, please? Okay. On the non-domestic rates, levying Scotland number 3 regulations 2012 SSI 2012 353. Drafting of paragraph 2 of regulation 6 appears to be defective. Paragraph states that nothing in paragraph 2 shall affect the continuing operation of non-domestic rates levying Scotland regulations 2012 as regards any day prior to the 1st of April 2013. This requires to refer to paragraph 1 for the savings provisions properly to have effect. Does the committee agree to draw the regulations to the attention of the Parliament on reporting ground I, as the drafting is clearly defective? We do. Does the committee agree to note that the Scottish Government has undertaken to lay amending regulations to come into force on the 31st of March 2013 to correct this error prior to these regulations coming into force?
We welcome the Government's intention to amend this.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank you. No points have been raised by the legal advisors on the Scottish Administration Officers Order 2012 SI 2012 3073, nor on the General Pharmaceutical Council Amendment to Miscellaneous Provisions Rules Order of Council 2012 SI 2012 3171, nor on the Police Act 1997 Criminal Record Scotland Amendment Regulations 2012 SSI 2012 354, nor on the Sports Grounds and Sporting Events Designation Scotland Amendment Order 2013 SSI 2013 number 4, nor on the Plant Health Scotland Amendment Order 2013 SSI 2013 5, nor on the Restriction of Liberty Order, etc. Scotland Regulations 2013 SSI 2013 6. Is the committee content with these instruments, please? Thank you. Agenda item 3. Instruments not subject to any parliamentary procedure. No points have been raised by our legal advisors on the National Library of Scotland Act 2012 Commencement Order 2013 SSI 2013 number 1. Whether members have any comments on that, or are we content with that instrument, please? We are. Thank you. This brings us to agenda item 4, Post-16 Education Scotland Bill. The purpose of this item is for the committee to consider the delegated powers in the Post-16 Education Scotland Bill. In considering the bill, the committee is invited to agree the questions it wishes to raise with the Scottish Government on the delegated powers in the bill. It's suggested that these questions are raised in written correspondence, and on the basis of the responses received, the committee would expect to consider a draft report at its meeting on the 5th of February. Section 4 enables the Scottish Ministers to make an order prescribing the upper limit on tuition fees chargeable to students from the rest of the United Kingdom in respect of higher education courses. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government to explain, given the reliance placed on the fact that fees will not exceed those chargeable elsewhere in the UK, what level of parliamentary scrutiny applies when higher education fees are being set by the relevant rulemaking authorities in each part of the United Kingdom? And further to this, and given that in Scotland the setting of fees for higher education courses under Section 9 of the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 2005 is subject to a form of super-affirmative procedure, why is the negative procedure considered to be appropriate when setting the maximum fees payable by students from the rest of the United Kingdom? Agreed. Section 7 of the bill substitutes a new Section 24 into the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 1992. Section 24, at present, enables the Scottish Ministers to remove members of a college's Board of Management for mismanagement of the affairs of the Board. The replacement Section 24 specifies additional circumstances where the Ministers may remove board members. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government to explain why it is considered necessary to expand upon the original powers to remove board members in Section 24 of the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 1992 to the extent set out in the substituted section? The basis for reaching that conclusion and the basis for concluding that the negative procedure continues to be the appropriate level of parliamentary scrutiny, given the substantial expansion of the power to remove and its resulting impact on the independence of boards of management and their members. John.
Indeed, and I would just say this is quite a radical extension of powers, as I understand it, and I do think that what you've just said, I just want to emphasise the point that we do need a very strong justification for the increased scope of these powers.
Hans Allen.
Yeah, I also agree with that sentiment. I think it's rather important, particularly since we are going to be reducing the number of colleges in Scotland overall, with colleges coming together and amalgamating with each other. I think the independence of boards is important, and therefore I'm pretty keen to find out exactly why is it they would need this additional power.
Okay, thank you. Section 12 inserts new section 23N into the 2005 Act. It appears to be closely modelled on the replacement section 24 of the 1992 Act, which we just agreed to ask the Scottish Government for further explanation of, and it's applicable to the regional boards. Any variations appear merely to reflect the differing functions of the colleges and regional boards. Does the committee therefore agree to await any explanation offered by the Scottish ministers in response to the previous question before forming a view on this power?
Sensible.
Thank you. A new Schedule 2A is inserted into the 2005 Act by the Bill. It specifies the regional strategic bodies. Section 8.1 inserts Section 7B, which gives the Scottish ministers power to modify the schedule. Section 13 and section inserts a new Section 23O into the 2005 Act, which makes supplemental provision about the establishment and abolition of regional boards. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government to clarify the level of parliamentary procedure which it is intended to apply to this power, given that the effect of Section 34 of the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 2005 is to make it subject to the negative procedure, when the Delegated Powers Memorandum indicates that the affirmative procedure is applicable, to explain whether, standing the analogy to the procedure applicable to orders under Section 7.1 of that Act, it is intended that the appropriate procedure is that applicable to Section 7.1 as it stands, or Section 7.1 as prospectively amended by paragraphs 6, 20 of the schedule to the Bill, and what steps they propose to take to ensure that the Bill adequately reflects its policy intentions in respect to the parliamentary procedure applicable to this power. John?
Yes, I agree with that, and I think we need clarification, as it were, under what circumstances affirmative and negative procedures will be used, unless I've missed the point, which is far from impossible, but it's not immediately clear to me at the moment the circumstances when one procedure or another will be applied and who will decide, and therefore will Parliament have scrutiny of those choices or not.
Questions we're asking invite the government to give some explanation. I think that's the plan. Schedule 2B to the 2005 Act is inserted by Section 11.2 of the Bill. It provides for the constitution, functions and administrative arrangements of regional boards. Paragraph 18.1 of the schedule confers on the Scottish ministers a power to modify the schedule, with the exception of paragraph 2 relating to the status of boards, by varying, adding to or removing any of its provisions relating to a board's constitution, functions or administrative arrangements. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government whether they are in a position to provide any further explanation as to why the negative procedure is appropriate, given that it is a power to modify primary legislation, and the committee does not consider the reference to the procedure applicable under the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 1992 to be conclusive, given A, that no power in that Act appears to be subject to affirmative procedure, and B, that it's now over 20 years since that Act was considered by the United Kingdom Parliament, and that the approach to delegation of powers appears to have altered since then. Good. John?
These appear to be very wide powers to amend primary legislation by a negative instrument, and I certainly think, again, we need a justification of that, and what was normal perhaps in 1992. I think we are a new Parliament and we have new procedures, and therefore we need a better justification than we perhaps have.
And I think that question reflects the principal position which we now hold, which is that when you're amending primary text of legislation, it should, in principle, be the affirmative procedure. Let's see what the government gives us. Thank you. Section 15 of the bill, unlike all the powers previously discussed, is an integral part of the bill rather than an amendment of the 1992 or the 2005 Act. It enables the Scottish ministers to make subordinate legislation requiring any person to provide information which that person holds about a young person to Skills Development Scotland Co Limited for the purposes of enabling or assisting Skills Development Scotland to monitor that young person's involvement in education or training, to provide advice or support as regard the young person's education or training, or to exercise any of its other functions in relation to that young person. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why, given the stated position in the Delegated Powers Memorandum that they will wish to impose the duties under this section on persons who are providing education and training to young persons, it is necessary that it's framed more widely to allow them to impose that duty on any person? And given the breadth of the power and the possibility that it may be used in a manner other than which it is apparently intended at some point in the future, whether it would not be more appropriate to ensure that such an order is subject to the greater parliamentary scrutiny by way of affirmative procedure. Agreed? Okay. Section 15.5 is intended to enable the Scottish ministers to modify Section 15 to replace references to Skill Development Scotland with references to any other person. It appears that it is also intended to allow them to update Section 15 to reflect changes in name. That is, where a person referred to remains the same, but has changed its name. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it's considered that the power in Section 15.5 may be used to effect a change of name, given that the change of name does not involve any change in the legal personality, so there is no other person to substitute for references to Skills Development Scotland Co Limited? Whether the power in Section 15.5 is intended to be exercisable more than once, and if so, whether this means that the power is capable of modifying the reference to Skills Development Scotland Co Limited within the power itself, and if this is the intended effect, whether this is sufficiently clear from the drafting. Section 15.7 contains a bespoke ancillary power provision in addition to the standalone power in Section 17. It enables the Scottish ministers, in making an order under 15.1 or 15.5, to include such supplementary, incidental, consequential, transitional, transitory or saving provision as they consider appropriate. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it's considered necessary to seek bespoke ancillary powers provision for the purposes of Section 15, when it appears to the committee that an adequate provision for ancillary powers is already made in Section 17 of the bill, which powers could also be exercised in an instrument made under Section 15?
Excessive belt and braces, perhaps, but then an awful lots of belts and braces if you already have the power ones.
Let's ask the question and see what kind of reply we get. Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of agenda item 4. Members will be happy to note, and that brings us, of course, to agenda item 5, the 4th Road Bridge Bill. Purpose of this item is for the committee to consider the delegated powers in the 4th Road Bridge Bill. Members will have seen the delegated powers memorandum and the briefing paper. Unless amendments that affect the delegated powers provisions are made to the bill at stage 2, the committee will not consider it again. Does the committee agree to report that it is content with the power in Section 5, which would allow the Scottish ministers to revoke bylaws made under the 4th Estuary Transport Authority under the 4th Estuary made by the 4th Estuary Transport Authority under the 4th Estuary Transport Authority Order of 2002 by extending their existing power to make traffic regulations orders under Section 1 of the Road Traffic Regulations Act 1984, and for such orders not to require to be laid before the Parliament, nor to be subject to any parliamentary procedure in terms of Section 34 of the Interpretation and Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2010. And if that's the last time I have to say 4th Estuary Transport Authority, I should be very happy. Does the committee agree to report that it's content with the power in Section 7, which would allow the Scottish ministers to commence the provisions in the bill, except for sections 6, 7 and 8, which will come into force the day after the royal assent, and for that power to be subject to the default laying requirement in section 30 of the Interpretation and Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2010. We are, thank you. Agenda item 6, the Budget Scotland number 2 bill. We move now to the Budget Scotland number 2 bill. This bill confers one delegated power set out in section 7 of the bill, which makes provision for the budget revision orders. This power is subject to the affirmative procedure. It is, I think, in the context of this Parliament, absolutely standard stuff. Are we agreed to report to the Parliament we're content with that delegation of the power and that the affirmative procedure is acceptable? We are, thank you. Agenda item 7 is the proposed government bills. Members have before them a note from the clerk and correspondence from the Referendum Scotland Bill Committee concerning the timetable for the scrutiny of the proposed government bills. The Referendum Scotland Bill Committee has invited the committee's views on the relation to that timetable, and they ask for a response by Friday the 25th of January. Do members have any comments, please? Are we happy to recognise the timetable as we're given it? And the necessity of that?
To go ahead with this, then this is the way of doing it. Let's get on with it.
Members are apparently content with that. Good, thank you very much indeed. At which point I think I can close the meeting.